Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tuesday Tips, brought to you by Hunt with Deed Official. I'm Carter, here with my two favorite facial-haired gentlemen. Not to make Perry too jealous, but we've got Carrie and Evan joining us tonight. What's going on, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh man, just another great day. I'm starting to recognize a pattern, Carter. Every podcast you introduce your guest, you always call them your favorite. I used to take it to heart and think I was your favorite, but now I'm getting a little butt hurt because everyone seems to be your favorite.
Well, is it?
What you need to do is take some data points. I do a lot of tips with you and your brothers, and you and your brother do happen to be two of my favorite individuals. So, maybe I'm tossing that term around a little too loosely, but you guys still both rank up there amongst my favorite individuals. So don't be too salty. It still comes from the heart. All right, Carrie. Yeah, we're talking what we got in our pack, and we're talking not necessarily disaster mitigation, but planning for what you hope doesn't happen in the backcountry. And Carrie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your article that's coming out later this week or next week?
Yeah. So by the time that this episode will air, that article will have dropped onto our main website at huntwithdeed.com. So please check it out. I've got an Alabama public education, so if things are misspelled, I apologize. But yeah, you know, I dove head first into like this survival thing, man. Like, so I got my start in the outdoors a little bit differently. Like my experience is a little bit unique, and it kind of gave me a different perspective on things. Not that I wasn't an outside kid and I fished and stuff like that, but I never really got super into the outdoors until I was already in special operations with a couple of deployments under my belt. That really I started diving into this, and I started out diving into more of the survival type stuff, more of like towards that bushcrafty type thing. And then 5 years ago, I actually started hunting and fishing a lot more again. So when I'm looking at things, I'm looking at things from the lens of a guy who's carried a 72-hour assault pack, a go bag, truck bag, whatever you want to call it, conducting operations throughout Iraq, Afghanistan, and all these other places. And I carried that over into the outdoors. And so when I'm looking at a task, let's just say, for example, Carter, you're looking at the first thing you're going to look at in the deer woods is maybe habitat, right? Like for the animal itself. And I'm looking at more, which is probably why I don't kill as many animals as some people, but I'm looking at more like what are resources I can use if something goes bad in the woods, right? Not like a survival expert or anything like that, but definitely survival minded. And so with that, with my job as well within special operations, a big part of that was analyzing what we were going to do, right? So we would do a mission analysis before every deployment, where we look at everything, man, like everything for dude, all the way from where am I going to sleep to what are we being asked to do in this country, right? And so when we did that, we started basically looking at what is stopping us, what is going to try to stop us from accomplishing the task we're set out to do, right? And so by doing that, you're looking at it's basically the enemy, right? The enemy has a vote, and you look at what's most likely and what's most dangerous, right? So what's most likely and most dangerous on a combat operation within Afghanistan is going to look totally different. Hell, it looks totally different than it did in Iraq, but it's going to look totally different than it does there in Georgia or in North Carolina, where I'm at in Kentucky. It looks vastly different, but the principles still remain, right? So, when I say the enemy has a vote, Carter, you're not going to run into a jihadist, man. Like you might, I guess, but
Whoa.
I sure hope.
yeah, you never know, right? But
Times are weird.
You're a school teacher, man. Like, what's happening lately, dude? Like bad things are happening in schools, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of on that extreme. Like that's more basically what I picture is like the enemy has a vote. Like I'm picturing things like that, but it's also like you're traveling a lot for stuff for HLE, right? What if something happens? Your car breaks down. You're stuck on the side of the road. You live in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. So there's nobody around. Like, what are you going to do? Right? Are you prepared to handle that? We all go to the woods. Evans, I don't know how many turkeys he slayed this year, and deer, but like that dude is constantly in the woods killing animals, right? Um, you're in the woods a lot. I'm in the woods a lot. Like what I'm doing there, I'm looking at what's most likely a threat, right? What's the enemy when I'm in the woods, right? That could be anything from like a slip and fall to I just get lost. Um, maybe Evan's got a big buck down and he's way back in the holler somewhere in Virginia, near Luke's property or something. And he's not dragging that sucker out in the middle of, it's dark. He found the deer. It's dark. It's been raining. He's not going to be able to drag that out. What's he going to do? Is he going to be able to hold up there throughout the night? Instead of trying to make a trek back through wet and dark terrain. So I don't know. I don't know if you guys look at stuff like that too before you go out. Do you guys ever? I mean, you may not think most likely and most dangerous. Evan, you might actually. But what about you, Carter?
You guys have a far different training background than I do, for sure, right? And what I pick up from a lot of I've learned my woodsmanship and my craft in the woods from hunting. And you guys have a different background from that as well. And you've combined kind of those two backgrounds to make you a much better predator in these things that we love to do. So I try to glean as much information as I can from folks who have training in professional medical backgrounds and folks who have done dangerous places or done dangerous things in dangerous places. But like for me, like for example, something like you said, the enemy has a vote. Like sometimes for me, that's the weather, right? The weather has a vote, right? And sometimes that's as close as I get to the enemy, right? So thinking about our Colorado trip in November on this elk hunt, I like day trips a lot. That's kind of like how I like to do my Western hunts. That's where I feel comfortable with right now. Not doing 10-day excursion trips or anything like that. That's where I feel like my skill level is at. I like to know that, okay, if shit goes really wrong and I can still walk on two legs, even if it gets real fucking cold, all right, I'm gonna walk till daylight. Like I can do that. Um, and try and mitigate that as much as possible. If my legs go down, right, I started carrying, and Evan helped me make my med kit a little more robust a couple years ago after I was a first responder to two pretty serious car accidents in the last couple years, and that made me rethink a lot of things because you go through life thinking like, oh, that's never going to happen, right? I'm never going to fall out of a tree stand. I'm never going to get into a like whatever car accident where I'm going to end up upside down on 141 here, like right down the road or like whatever,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and then all of a sudden I'm pulling some chick out of her car. I'm cutting her out of her seatbelt upside down, glass everywhere, blood everywhere. And it's like, holy shit.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It just changes your perspective, right? So that definitely addresses like a couple things you need to have with you at all times. And my biggest life-changing piece of gear, I guess, was a tourniquet. So now I have tourniquets everywhere, right? Because I put a tourniquet on that woman, and that was super cool. And actually, Evan taught me how to do that properly.
Yeah, it's awesome. And that's an example of most dangerous, right? So we most likely most dangerous, man. Like, but it's within the realm of possibilities, and you've seen it firsthand. You've seen what that most dangerous looks like, and now you were able to help, and now you're probably better off for it, right? So you're probably more prepared in case you run into that situation again. That was an awesome example, man.
Yeah, for sure, right? And you don't. I feel like as hunters, a lot of times we don't think about that situation because like we're amped to go hunting. It's like a positive experience, and like we're going out to have a good time, but actually, we're doing something that could potentially be like super dangerous to ourselves or others around us, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Evan? What are you kind of toting around? What's your mindset? Even hunting like the family farm or like, you spend more time in the woods than a lot of people I know, man. What is kind of your mindset?
I will say that the military has definitely given me a certain thing, but I think growing up, we had a father that was pretty on Mon and Perry's ass about thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. And that helped me in the military. And I was like, when I joined the military, I had common sense. Well, let me rephrase that. I had knowledge that I thought was common sense and I learned was not. But it was very applicable to the military just because of how we were raised. And I'll tell a quick story to give an example of what I'm talking about. There was a local farmer in our hometown. He didn't have a cell phone. He was an old man. And this story happened when I was young. I remember this story circulating around a hardware store when I was, in high school. And every night he didn't have a cell phone, but he would tell his wife, and his wife knew each pasture by name that he would work in. And he would tell his wife what area on their land he was going to be working that day. It just so happened he was doing tractor work. He was baling hay. He went and parked his tractor. He didn't get finished for the evening. It started to get dark, and he would always tell his wife, hey, if I'm not home 30 minutes after dark, then come look for me. Sure enough, he was climbing down from his tractor. He parked on a corner parcel of land, and he slipped off the step of his tractor and fell on a survey stake, a rebar survey stake. And it went up through his, pardon my French, but up through his gooch and came out his pelvis. So he had a penetrating wound through his taint, protruding through his pelvis, and he was stuck to the ground. This was an elderly man. I say elderly, like late 60s, early 70s. And had he not had the contingency plan of letting his wife know, if I'm not home, 30 minutes after dark, and he'd done that for years without incident, right? But his wife knew that. And sure enough, he didn't come home. She got in the old farm truck, drove out there, and found him passed out, bleeding, sitting by the tractor, called 911. They airlifted him out, saved his life, right? Now, there's a lot of, it's old-time farmer cell phones now, all that. But we always think, like you said, Carter, it can't happen to us. Another big thing for me is I was a logger before I joined the Army. And as you know, Carter, I'm sure you know Carrie by now, Perry and I, we do a lot of chainsaw work on our farm, whether that's cutting firewood for the cabin or doing TSI or just routine land management practices. We're constantly running chainsaws. I use a tractor a lot. There's a myriad of things that you can be doing to your land management, not just hunting, not just, outdoor recreation, but like when you're doing those off-season chores that can lead to a slip, a trip, or whatever. And so I would say one thing as far as that, like a lot of people think when you're talking like hunting, bush work, bushcraft, like, you got your emergency blanket, you got your fire starter. For us working on a less than 500 acre farm, it's not that applicable. We're not, like you said, Carrie, if I shoot a buck and can't get it out that night, I have never ran into that circumstance. But if that happened because, no one was available to help me, I would just wait until sunup. I would walk the 30 minutes back to the cabin, sleep in a warm cabin with a wood stove, and then go out the next morning. However, if I'm doing farm work and I'm running a chainsaw and whatever, you get complacent, you nick yourself. I watched a guy lay a 660 steel, which is a big chainsaw, into his thigh. And we were 45 minutes back up in the woods and then 30 minutes from the closest hospital. So an hour and 15 minutes. And he filleted the top of his thigh to where his femur was exposed and hanging down over his knee. So like chainsaw accidents are dangerous. And that's one example again. But so one thing I've implemented, and I would caution anyone that spends any amount of time, and Perry can tell you I do this, if Perry's not there, or even if he's coming up that night, frequently I'll beat him to the farm when we're doing farm work. He'll get there later than me. I'll let him know, hey, I'm going to be in the northeast corner of the property doing X, Y, Z. So he knows if I'm not at the cabin when he gets there, that's a red flag. He needs to go check it out. I'll let my wife know. I'll let my uncle know if Perry's not there, like, hey, I'm going to be on this area. And I have driven my wife around the farm and showed her, like, this is where that spot is. This is where that spot is. So that's kind of where my mind works. It's not as much hunting the Eastern Mountains just because of, and honestly, I probably should do a little more when I'm hunting and Perry and I are good about letting each other know, but maybe letting my wife know I'm going to be in this location. I'm constantly, not constantly, I text my wife here and there. I have a tradition. Every time I kill a turkey, I FaceTime my wife first thing, you know what I mean? So like, she knows if she doesn't hear from me in half a day, something's probably not right. You know what I mean? Hunting on our farm. Yeah. Now out west, it's a different subject, and we've talked a little bit about that. But I think a lot of people get complacent when they're hunting their local farms. It's not a hunting trip. It's almost like when you get in your car and drive hours, or you get on a plane and fly to a destination. Your brain's more programmed to that planning as opposed to when you're like, I'm just going to take a walk behind the house on public land for, an evening, and you don't have those contingencies. What happens if you're dragging a buck and it's December and you slip and fall in a stream and you soak your base layers in and it's 32 degrees? Well, you can get hypothermia in 70 degrees. You know what I mean? So like those are the things that I always try to remind myself of the hazards. Like Perry and I one time waded the creek, and we were talking like it was so cold that if we didn't have a fire going at the cabin, we waded this creek and like water got in over my boots. Like it was a low risk, but there was the potential risk for hypothermia there on our farm. And the cabin was hundreds of yards away, not miles, yards. You know what I'm saying? And like, just those stupid things that can happen that you don't expect are usually what ends up screwing you. And if you do have the forethought to think about it, if you have a relative like, hey, I'm going to be in this location if you don't hear from me by this time. And that is one thing the Army does, right? Like, this carry like checkpoints, communication windows. Like if you're in an area where comms are bad, you have like 2 hours to meet a comms window. And if that comm window is down, from that mark, there might be another 2 hours so they launch a QRF, right? Like those things are in place for no comm stuff. So you can implement that with your family when you're just out on the farm mowing hay or bush hogging or doing a controlled burn or fishing or working or whatever the circumstance. It can be anything. Like, hey, if I'm not home for dinner, then here's the area I'm going to be. Come look for me. And
Yeah, dude, I love that, man. So Carter, it's called the Gatwa. Basically, it's where am I going? What am I going to do? How long am I going to be gone? This is when I'll be back. If I'm not back by this time, this is what I want you to do. Right. So that's awesome. I do something similar. I usually send my wife a pin to where I'm at. Like, hey, this is where I'm hunting. I'll go sit in my tree stand. I'll send her a pin if I've got signal, which I just picked up an inReach because there's a lot of places I go that don't have signal. Haven't really gotten to play with it yet, but the idea behind having that kind of satellite backup, man, it's super awesome. But you brought up a couple of other things, Evan, man, other than that kind of 5 W's that Gatwa, right? Dude, when you're looking at preparedness, right? You're looking at what are you doing and where you're going, right? Time of year and all that stuff, right? And you mentioned that, like, you may not need to bring a survival blanket or a tarp or basically a shelter system, like a tent tarp thing or something like that on your family farm. But looking at your situation, it's late November, you're on family farm, you had to wade through that creek, you talked about, almost getting hypothermia. And like you said, you can get hypothermia when it's not cold. Maybe part of your plan is, hey, I know that cabin's only 100, yards away or whatever, a couple hundred yards away. Maybe I'm going to have everything prepped to make a quick fire.
Yeah.
Right. So basically there's no real work I got to do. Everything's all just ready. I walk in, got my kindling, got my tinder, and I'm ready to hook.
Yeah.
Right?
And we have a lot of that. Like Luke and I actually built, after we got older and kind of realized like shit can happen quickly. You're splitting firewood by yourself and you're splitting maul, your axe glances off a piece of wood and hits yourself in the shin. You can't drive yourself to the hospital. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like shit can happen quick. And so we built a pretty robust first aid kit. And then we have tourniquets staged, like we have tourniquets on our four wheelers. I actually need to replace the tourniquet on the tractor. That reminds me because it broke and I think it fell off when I was bush hogging. I noticed it wasn't there, but like, and those are, that shit happens, but it is good. Like our uncle, he's a retired lieutenant colonel, did 20 years, and he runs a cattle farm now, and Luke's dad, and he keeps tourniquets pre-poed everywhere just because you never fucking know. And it's one of those things, like some people might, I can't tell you how many guys, especially like, the old farmer type, they're like, oh, you don't need that, boy, that. All right, man, cool. Well, the time you do and you don't have it, you were talking, Carter, falling out of deer stands. I mean, a 3 stoplight town that I grew up in, I could name you 4 people right now that I know that have fell out of deer stands. And one of them's in a wheelchair.
Dude. And that shit happens fucking.
Yeah, one of them's in a freaking wheelchair. You know what I mean? Like, and it wasn't like a climbing stand. It wasn't like your typical thing. It was he had hung it with the cheapest ratchet straps he could find and hung it, 8 years prior and never checked his ratchet straps, and they dry rotted and gave way. He was sitting in it was a ladder platform stand, and he was sitting in it. Next thing you know, he's laying on his back with broken lower back and fractured pelvis. You know what I mean? Like shit's no joke.
That's another Tuesday tip, man. PMCS, PCCs, PCIs, man.
So, Yeah.
check your tree stand straps.
It's like we picked like the hobby or lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, that you should be the most like attentive to every aspect of the game, and I feel like it's one of the easiest to become so
And everyone
complacent
does it.
in.
The three of
Like,
us sitting here are guilty of complacency,
right.
and anyone says that
Oh,
they're
for sure.
on their
It's
game
so
100%
easy,
of the
right?
time
It's
is
so
fucking
easy.
lying to you. I don't care what experience, what background that
Right.
has. The thing about it is to keep having the conversation like we're doing right now. Like
Yep.
refresh your memory. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like, your iPhone gives you a little flashback of your photos, reminding you, oh, you had a camping trip last year. That's pretty cool. You kind of forgot about it until you see those photos and you laugh. Well, that's how you stay on top of it, is that, you surround yourself with guys that are willing to have that conversation and aren't the type of fella that'd be like, oh man, you're a pussy if you keep a tourniquet in your day pack when you're just bow hunting, on your family farm. Like, okay, maybe I'm a pussy then. I guess I am. Like, I'd rather do that and be able to, you know, go home and hug my kids at the end of the day. But I think having the
Yeah.
conversation is my point with that, is continuing to have the conversation is almost as important. Because like right now, I remember that tourniquet on the tractor, and I'm supposed to head up there this weekend. I guarantee you I wouldn't remember that had we not had this podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, man. And while medical is super important, man, you guys know the rule of threes, right? And so we kind of talked a little bit with Evan, that shelter, you know, how long can you go without shelter? 3 hours exposed, right? Depending on like, pretty extreme weather. 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, right? So like when you're out there, like Evan's got his shelter staged, but I guarantee you, when he's on that family farm and he's got that cabin stage, I guarantee you he's got extra layers in case he is out there late, weather turns bad, something like that. He's got that shelter system with him in conjunction with that cabin, so he didn't have to have that tarp, that tent system, sleeping bag, or whatever, right? Um, and then I'm sure he's got water. I don't know if you carry a way to be able to get more water, safe water, make it purify it, filter it, whatever. But that's something else you should probably think about too when you're going out and doing this. And then food's cool. Like being hungry sucks, but again, you can go 3 weeks without food. So your priorities got to be shelter and water, right? And then after that, I would probably put medical above food as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, like those are all things you should think about when you're going into the woods, doing what we do. Whether you're doing maintenance on your property, like Edmund with his tractor, running chainsaw work, or me, I'm just constantly in the woods, just scouting, just kind of being out there, right? So like you do got to be in your game, and sometimes it does take these conversations to make sure, like, oh shit, man, yeah, I do need to check my tourniquets. They've been in this pack for a
yeah,
year.
I will jump in there, Kerry,
So
because you
Yep.
mentioned a good point. Food, and a lot of people overlook that, right? They're like, oh, I'm hunting this permission land I have, and it's a half a mile walk back to the stand. But it's all, it's whatever the scenario, right? And you're like, I'm going to grab dinner on the way out. But then you shoot a deer, it's
yeah,
hot, and next thing you know, you haven't eaten anything in 8 hours, 6 hours. You brought one bottle of water or whatever you drink in the deer stand, a soda or coffee, something that's not good for hydration. And then you're tracking
Yeah.
this deer and you find this deer and you're dragging this deer back and your body starts giving out. You know what I mean? So like it's not even food like to sustain yourself or water to sustain yourself for long periods of time per se. Now it can be, if you're going on a 5-day backwoods hunt in Colorado or Alaska, yeah, it probably needs to be. But just having enough to sustain yourself for that, like, Luke has a great example of this pronghorn hunting, and he didn't pack enough water. And he said
Yeah.
he was literally on the verge of like serious dehydration, potentially rhabdo by the time he got back to the truck. Like, that's no shit. Anyone that's been in that situation, and unfortunately I have overseas, like, it's not a fun situation to be in. And so just keeping your body fueled for the activities you're doing, humping an animal out, even if it's just a few miles in Virginia or Georgia or Tennessee. It doesn't have to be the Rockies, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be British Columbia. Having just a beef stick in your pocket can go a long way. Some gummy bears and a liquid IV. Perry and I are big advocates of the liquid IV. I drink one of those a day, and every time I'm hunting, I literally keep one of those on me just because you can replenish electrolytes great. You know what I mean? Like those types of things can just go a long way for just ensuring your not only your like overall health, but your success too. Because you're, you know, if you're in a hunting application, if you're sucking, if you're winded, you're tired, your muscles are fatigued, you're dehydrated, you're not going to be as on your game. You know, you're not going to be as stealthy. You're not going to be as precise. You're not going to be as alert. You know what I mean? If your body's starving for nutrients. So just I wanted to piggyback off of you, Carrie, just because it doesn't have to be necessarily survival, but just sustainment for a rigorous activity you're doing.
Yeah, and you know, I said you can live 3 weeks without food, right? But something does happen that's you're bad. You're out there, and you know you got to stay overnight, right? It's a morale booster for one. Dudes kind of get a little wonky, man, when they haven't eaten. It's usually it's like SEER school, right? It's a good example. Like you don't eat for a few days. Like that first day where you're just kind of really hungry, your brain doesn't seem to work right. You start to kind of get over it after a day or two, and you start to kind of being okay for a little bit. Dude, that first day, man, your brain just gets fogged up, man. So I like that you brought up bringing food for that because these two things are always in my pack. I've got a little fruit bar or meat stick always in my pack. And then you brought up hydration and stuff, man. Like, dude, so you like liquid IV, man? We met up with the wilderness athlete dudes in Colorado 2 weeks ago, something like that. And I have fallen in love with their energy and focus and hydration. And then another brand partner of ours, I've always keep a couple of these in our pack too, that Wild Fit, just to kind of keep my head in the game in case something big. Obviously, it helps when you're in the tree stand, keeps you focused. But I also keep it as like, all right, things went bad. We got to keep our head on straight. Like, let me pop this in, you know, eat a bite of my meat stick or fruit bar or whatever I have. Just to keep, just to kind of keep your head in the game.
Yeah. It's all.
Yeah. 100%, dude. Got to keep something in the pack. And, I always, my two like go-tos, I always keep like multiple. After my first hunt in Alaska, I always keep like way too many ways to make a fire in my packs, even on day hunts, which is just like, I understand it's silly hunting like private land in Georgia, but like, I always have several because that fucking sucked.
Yeah.
That was just the worst.
Yeah, dude, I always have a
first night bear hunt in Alaska when I couldn't start a fire. I was like, this blows. This will never happen again.
Yeah, always matches, lighters, ferrocerium rods. Like I'm ready. I've got 3 to 4 ways to start a fire with me at just about all times.
Dick lighters everywhere.
Yep.
Ferro rod, even like a little tinder box, like a little like old school, like your granddad had, like a tin.
Yep.
I guess a tin box is what I keep in all my packs with some tinder and easy shit to light, that kind of stuff. And then I always keep my my rain gear always in the bottom of my pack forever. No matter what I do, I don't care what month it is, I don't care where I'm hunting. I will preach that to everybody every time. I'm talking about hypothermia earlier. Like, no joke, man. Being wet sucks. You guys know that. It's a bummer, man. So those are my two go-tos.
I'll say this all the time. I don't mind being wet and I don't mind being cold, but I can't fucking stand being wet and cold.
Wet and cold.
What I mean? Like,
yep. Yeah, man. And that wet weather gear, that's part of that shelter system, man. Like, you got 3 hours exposed in the elements. Now, of course, those are extreme elements, but that's part of your shelter system that gives you that little more time to get out of that bad situation. Or it'll just keep you in the game, right? So say you are in the tree stand and it does start raining, like you've got your rain jacket. It's not because you're in a survival situation. It's because you're trying to keep in the fight, right? You're trying to stay in the fight, stay in the hunt, right? So putting that extra piece of shelter system. And then unless it's just like middle of July, I've got like a light puffy or a grid fleece. And hell, middle of July, I've usually got at least a long sleeve, something, to add a little bit of insulation just in case, right? But
yeah, staying in the fight too, man. Sometimes those rainy hunts, those rainy sits are some of the best hunts you'll ever have. A lot of dudes bow out and aren't there, and I've seen a lot of cool deer activity doing that kind of stuff.
Perry and I talk about it all the time. Like I now a torrential downpour, if it's just hissing for hours, like all right, I might
Yeah, fuck that.
Yeah,
I'll go sit in
yeah.
the cabin.
I might scout and drink a beer from the porch, but
Yeah.
if it's just raining, I've killed a lot of deer in light rain. I've seen a lot of deer activity in the
Mm-hmm.
light rain. Same with turkeys. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't mean you're out of the game. So being prepared for that is definitely clutch.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Sweet, guys. I feel like we filled
Yeah.
this out pretty good. We probably should have just committed to a full one. So let's cut it
Yeah.
off here. Let's do a full one sometime soon, man. But yeah, everybody stay tuned for Carrie's article. It's going
I'm
to be dropping
excited
here
for that,
soon.
man.
Shout out to Josh Reed making that look cool and fancy.
Heck yeah.
When that comes out, everybody check it out. But Evan, you got any closing thoughts for us?
Just can't wait to do our annual turkey podcast, recapturing on some of the highs and lows of the notorious peach bottom turkey season.
That's right. Carrie and I don't have much to add to that this season.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of deer.
You found a lot of deadheads.
That's true too. I did find a lot of
I actually
deadheads.
found a little fox deadhead the other day. It was pretty sweet. I brought it home and bleached it. Got it all taxidermied up now. Yeah,
Nice.
It's cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, the six deadheads in a pile kind of threw me for a loop, man.
Witchcraft, brother. Witchcraft.
I'd walk away from that. I don't know. Carrie, you got any closing thoughts for us?
No, man. Well, yeah, I do actually. Look at your situation, look at your activity, look location, time of year, and think of most likely and worst case scenarios for things that could go bad, and try to be able to prepared to mitigate those things. So that way a bad situation doesn't become a catastrophic situation.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. My final words, my words of advice, words of wisdom would be listen to people who know more than you, who have experienced different things than you. Learn what you can always. That's the best part about one, being part of the Hunt Lift Eat community, and two, just being an outdoorsman. Like, there's always room on the board to be learning and listening. So that'd be my advice. So check it out. Shoot any of these guys a message if you got any questions about med kits or shit you should keep in your pack or anything under the sun. So yeah, shoot us a message. But listeners, as always, appreciate the hell out of you guys. We'll talk to you next week.